you want to do correcting mine? Yeah. Okay. Might as well. Might as well, then I don't have to move. Okay.
There is a ledge behind, I didn't mention that. If you're able to stand on the ledge, that's great. If you're not able to, leave the fit here. And the only thing I'd say is make sure our speakers aren't boxed in so we can get through our speaker.
On the side, if you want the side.
How you doing?
I was going to
Hey.
I can get folks that way with names, I'll just walk around with it, so go through with the president's building, I'll take those before we're done. Everybody good? Great?
Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Welcome everyone. My name is Philip Cryan. I use he, him pronouns. I am Executive Vice President of SEIU Healthcare Minnesota and Iowa. We're a union of over 55,000 healthcare workers in hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, and in-home care. And we are here today with a number of officials from the state of Minnesota to talk about the extreme cuts to the Medicaid program on which so many people all across Minnesota rely, that have been announced by the Trump administration, and that fortunately our Attorney General Keith Ellison and the state of Minnesota have taken legal action to try to stop. We are here today to talk about the human face of what would happen if these cuts go through, and vital services of in-home care that keep people in their communities, in their homes, with their loved ones, in the setting that they prefer, are taken away from Minnesotans. And from Minnesotans of every background, people from every part of the state of Minnesota, of every racial group in the state of Minnesota, of every political persuasion in the state of Minnesota, depend on Medicaid every day. So you're going to hear from home care workers and the people that they serve and their families about what's at stake if those services in the personal care assistant program and many other Medicaid programs are taken away from those Minnesotans. You're also going to hear from the state of Minnesota's Medicaid director, John Connolly, and there are other state officials who are here to answer questions at the end if you have any. So with that, I am going to introduce the first of the speakers representing our union and a home care worker who drove down this morning from Duluth in order to share her experience and perspective with you, my friend Andrea Hannick.
Hi there. My name is Andrea Hannick. I am a caregiver for two of my sons, and we live in Duluth, Minnesota. I serve as an executive board member for our union, SEIU Healthcare Minnesota and Iowa, and I also serve on the Northeast Minnesota Area Labor Council. I'm here today to call out the harm that could be caused and threatened by the Trump administration as they target vulnerable people across the nation. Last year, Republicans in Congress cut $1 trillion from Medicaid. Cuts which are already due to hit disabled people across the U.S. next year. Now we're watching the Trump administration turn its vengeful sights on Minnesota. We've all watched the violence and bloodshed from masked ICE agents on the news and in our social media feeds as they terrorize our communities and target our loved ones and our neighbors. Now they're using that same racism and xenophobia under the guise of fraud to try to cut another $2 billion from Medicaid programs in Minnesota, which includes the home care services our members provide. These services are the lifeline that help keep our elders and Minnesotans with disabilities, like my sons, safer in their homes and out of institutionalized care. Just over a month ago, one of my sons returned home after a prolonged hospital stay. The time he was in the hospital was difficult and heartbreaking for my son, his family, and me as his mom, because we lost time with him in our home, doing everyday things and important things. And there's a connection that we have to rebuild now. So now he's returned home, and we got the blessing of finding someone other than me to provide for care for his disability-related needs. So as difficult as this time was, I'm now imagining how hard it will be for us moving forward without this home care service. The bottom line, we won't. If my son loses the care that maintains the progress he made in the hospital, he may not survive. We and so many others just like us need every single piece of this puzzle to work, or these kids won't make it. These programs save and sustain lives every day, and they're being targeted. Why? For what? Political points? Revenge for having a governor who dares to disagree with this administration? To pay for ICE to terrorize us? Is this the country that we live in now? Really? They've been playing political games since the election, using tired old rhetoric to stoke our worst impulses. But this week, it is clear in Minnesota that these are no longer political games. They are attacks. They hate Minnesota so much they're willing to let our disabled and our elderly loved ones die to punish us. And they want us to hate our neighbors so much that we call it justified. We cannot fall for this. We are better than this. If we allow these attacks here in Minnesota, they will not stop here. They will aim these attacks at any state that dares to challenge them or stand in their way. And they're showing us that they will start with the most vulnerable. This has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Next, we'll invite up Ms. Deb Housey.
Thank you all for having us here. My name is Deb Housey, and I've been a home care worker, paid and unpaid, for over 40 years. During that time, I have cared for countless people so they can stay in their homes. I once cared for a woman who was over 101 years old, who was able to stay in her home because of me. I currently work with 3 different clients, one who has Parkinson's, one who's on continuous oxygen, and one who has MS. 2 of them are losing their housing because the rent is raising faster than their fixed incomes. People are barely hanging in there as before, like all this craziness that's going on. We made big strides here in Minnesota supporting this work, which is good for both workers and the people we care for. Governor Walz actually walked a day with me. He worked with me doing a walk a day a few years back to see the challenges of our work. And he has helped us raise raises for this work to make sure we have enough people to care for the seniors and people with disabilities. But cutting Medicaid is to punish our state will mean seniors and people with disabilities will die. This is what this has come to. People dying in the streets, people dying in their homes, people dying in their cars, people dying in the hospitals, having no place to go. This is what this means. Everyone will have one day need Medicare, whether for themselves or their loved ones. Who knows? We are divided. They want to divide us. They want to use us as scapegoats, certain people. But we also know that these cuts will hurt people of every color. People are going to be out in the streets just dying. So do they care? do they care? Or do they only care about giving billionaires tax cuts and funding mass agents, killing our neighbors and tearing our communities and our families apart? Trump is trying to make an example out of Minnesota because we actually are trying to help people. Trump has already cut so much. How could they cut more? For what? What's his motive? What's his attacks on Minnesota? Why us first? Why us last? Why us at all? Do they care at all? People are getting hurt by these cuts. Trump, Dr. Oz, all of you, stop playing games. Stop playing cards. Stop shuffling people around. People are suffering. People are actually going to die, and people are dying. I'm 76 years old. I have problems. So in addition to being a caregiver, I am a part of my union's retiree council, where we fight to make sure seniors are taken care of. Do Donald Trump and his billionaire friends care at all about seniors and people with disabilities? Well, he's a senior himself. All of them are senior citizens coming down the pipeline, getting help. They have paid care. They have it until they die. They have no challenges like we do. So what's this all about? It's clear. The answer is no. Are you listening? Are we listening? The attacks must stop on Medicare. Stop attacking our immigrants. Stop using fraud as an excuse to hurt people. Just stop. Stop playing cards with people's life and shuffling us around. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Deb. And our next speaker is Starlisha Doby.
Thank you, Philip. This room is awfully quiet. Can I get an SE? I-U. S-E. I-U. Thank you. We're here. Hello, my name is Starlisha Doby. I'm here to speak about the impact that could be caused by withholding or deferring funds from Medicaid programs in Minnesota. Now, I understand the goal of the Center for Medicaid Services and our elected leaders is to prevent Medicaid fraud. I also recognize that some providers in Minnesota have abused the system, making transparency and accountability more important than ever. I also understand there are specific guidelines for determining who is eligible to receive Medicaid services. Now, however, what I cannot comprehend is the justification for withholding or delaying billions of dollars from low-income families, children, seniors, and people with disabilities. Withholding funds from Medicaid programs could cause a health care crisis affecting all Minnesotans and healthcare systems. Programs that help our children, the disabled, the elderly, this could cause premiums to rise. This could cause our providers, our healthcare providers, not to be able to provide adequate care for those who are especially in need. Why should everyday Americans pay the price and suffer due to the actions of those committing fraud? Minnesota has endured enough hardships and loss. Melissa and Mark Hortman murdered in 2025. Philando Castile killed in 2016. George Floyd, murdered in 2020. And now Renee Nicole Good, killed 2026. All lives lost by law enforcement and gun violence. Why are we not talking about police reform and gun violence in America? Why isn't the government casting a spotlight on that? Let's address incoming inequality, racism, and bigotry that our ancestors died and marched for, that we're still trying to overcome to this day. Let's talk about how rent income is too damn high and why buying a home is not an option for so many. Let's talk about unaffordable child care and unaffordability and student loans. Let's talk about misogyny and unequal pay in the workplace that still exists. Let's address all the issues that have long existed in America, all across America, not just in blue states, not just in the great state of Minnesota. All people want is for our elected officials to do their jobs and for the government to stop using the lives of Americans as pawns in their political games. It's not a game. Minnesota didn't ask to be on display. We are still healing. But I am so proud of my state for continuing to peacefully protest and stand up for what we believe in. This is not a time to be afraid. Our ancestors had much less than we have, yet they had much more to fight for. They were fearless. Continue to protest, Minnesota. Continue to stand up for what you believe in. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Starlisha. And our last speaker is the State Medicaid Director, John Connolly, who's going to share a perspective on the cuts that have been announced by the Trump administration. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks all for being here. And it's hard to follow that act. There isn't a lot to add to that, but some of it bears repeating. Because Medicaid services are essential for so many people, it's important for us to remain focused on the facts. We must avoid emotions, politics, and hyperbole that can cloud the transparency the people of Minnesota deserve right now. When CMS sent us at the Department of Human Services here in Minnesota a December 5th letter asking for a corrective action plan, we understood the urgency they were communicating to us. With a December 31st deadline just 26 days away, we worked hard to provide the information they requested. We had been working on this issue, program integrity, as a top priority for well over a year, and many of the suggested changes had either been implemented or were in process. And since October 2024, we had been working frequently in partnership with CMS staff to harden our processes, minimize risk, and prevent fraud. As we were implementing their suggestions over the months, CMS staff did not indicate that our work was insufficient. In fact, CMS has been a longtime partner, reviewing and approving multiple times how we administer our Medicaid program in Minnesota through our state plan and waivers. So we were disappointed to find out that our draft corrective action plan, submitted on New Year's Eve, was summarily rejected in an unprecedented way, with little substantive analysis of the facts and no time for the state and federal agencies that typically partner to discuss and agree upon a corrective action plan that would be implemented. There are numerous politically charged claims of how much Minnesota has lost to Medicaid fraud, and to be very clear, even $1 of fraud is too much. And our work to prevent and fight fraud is nowhere near done. Further, our investigations are continuing and our findings are evolving. But guessing about amounts is not going to solve the problem. We're particularly concerned that CMS did not conduct a recent audit to support their decision to disallow or defer funds. It relied on off-topic and out-of-date reports from 2017 to 2021, and those reports aren't relevant to the issues currently facing our program and our state. Additionally, there are no facts to support withholding all funds from the 14 benefits that were named. Even if there is a finding of non-compliance, the withholding must be based on specific findings from a review or audit. You can't just choose a number when you're talking about funding that is essential to many people's health and well-being and could even determine, as folks here said, whether people live or die. Right now, we're waiting for CMS to set a hearing date so we can address these issues. We're confident in our plan to address fraud in Minnesota, and we want to continue to work with CMS to resolve these issues and to serve the people of Minnesota together. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And with that, we'll take questions, and I'll just note that the State Agriculture Secretary, Tom Peterson, and State Budget Director, Anna Mingy, are also here and available if you have questions for them.
Have you had any further conversations with Dr. Oz or anybody today, or have you heard directly from him other than in that video message and other communications?
We did have a meeting with Administrator Oz and senior administrators at CMS today here in Minnesota, yes.
And did anything come of that?
I would characterize the discussion as productive. I think we agree on the overall aim of fighting fraud and enhancing program integrity here in Minnesota and broadly in the Medicaid program. It should be noted, though, that they may characterize the meeting differently. Our experience has been that we have had productive and constructive conversations with CMS officials recently about this issue, and their characterization of the conversation ends up being quite different coming out of it. So you'll have to ask them what their view of the conversation was.
Any indication they were willing to back off on this at all, or are they sticking to their guns?
We didn't discuss the specific disallowance or deferral amounts, that the cuts that they're proposing to our Medicaid program. That the dollar figure was not discussed. Specific elements of the corrective action plan were discussed.
It looks like Deputy Secretary O'Neill was here as well. Same meeting.
That's correct.
Okay. And then I know you kind of talked a little bit about this yesterday, some of the uncertainty about the total amount of funds and the timing. But I'm still confused. Does the process of filing an appeal pause their ability to pause the funding for now? Will it continue to flow while the appeal plays out, or could they still halt at any time?
So we submitted a letter of appeal of the decision, and of course, I think it's up to CMS how they will implement this decision. It's not clear to us yet, again, as we discussed, I think, in previous conversations, how exactly this would be implemented or what exactly the dollar amount will be. They suggested the $515 million quarterly figure, but not based on any audits or findings. It's a 25% of billing figure in their estimation for the 14 benefits that we identified as high risk.
How much of this is about fraud? How much of it is about being punitive towards the state and so?
Well, it certainly, as we said in our appeal letter, feels very punitive to us because this is way outside of the usual process and counter to federal regulation for how these corrective action plans are handled. Again, typically there's an audit, there are findings or a focused review. CMS may do something of that nature. There are findings that then that will inform a corrective action plan. So discrete problems that were found in that audit, the state would craft a draft corrective action plan, negotiate that with CMS, they would agree upon it, and then if the state doesn't make progress toward the milestones in the plan, at that point then CMS would withhold or disallow funds.
And to be clear, we're talking about CMS threatening to pull the funds. We are talking about for those 14 programs that DHS has deemed high risk for fraud, and that Dr. Oz laid out in that December letter saying if you don't take these steps to pause provider enrollment in these programs for the end of 2026, we will withhold those funds.
Well, to be clear, the amount was based on a spending figure or a claiming figure of the state for the 14 services. But $2 billion is $2 billion. So $2 billion in federal matching funds comes back to the state, and that's a massive portion of both the state budget and the state Medicaid program spending. So either way, it will have a broad effect on what we're able to deliver in terms of Medicaid services, but also the broader state budget.
So we're talking about two different things here than what they suggested in this letter in December about saying pause all provider enrollment for those 14 programs, or we will, without giving over, withhold federal funds. You're saying this is something else that they're threatening?
So we submitted in our draft corrective action plan on New Year's Eve some information responsive to those requests. So both the provider enrollment moratorium, which we announced last week, in addition to the provider revalidations. Those things are now both underway. It should be either implemented shortly. The provider enrollment moratorium will take some months to conclude. Our plan is to get that done by the end of May. So those things were agreed to by the state and will be in any draft of the corrective action plan going forward, again, at the request of CMS.
What sort of avenues, I guess, are available if that money is eventually cut for? Are you guys preparing in any sort of way with the legislature to take a look? Is it even possible to offset that?
No, I think the short answer is no. $2 billion in a federal cut to the state budget and the Medicaid program is something the state just can't absorb. And the governor does not have authority to just tap the rainy day fund as has been suggested. So that's not an automatic option. Again, the governor doesn't have that authority. So we don't have good options, and I think we'd have to see how CMS implements a cut to the federal funding and to Medicaid, and the impact it would have to the state budget, and difficult decisions would have to be made.
Is there a reason you didn't discuss the specific amounts with Dr. Oz?
It wasn't really on the agenda today. I think the focus was foremost the corrective action plan, and we have an appeal that's live with CMS, so that's really the forum where the administrative appeal process is where we'll cover that.
Has there been any assessment of which programs are going to be hardest hit by these cuts, or is that kind of an ongoing process?
Well, again, it's hard to say. I mean, $2 billion is going to have a broad, blunt impact across the program into the state budget. But again, there will have to be difficult decisions about how the state would absorb that should it come to pass.
Could Commissioner Peterson come up for a moment for a question about USDA funding? Commissioner, have you been able to determine yet what programs will be impacted if funds are also cut to your department?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's been changing hour to hour, and so last Friday, the governor and our Secretary Rollins sent a letter to the governor and to Mayor Jacob Fry announcing $129 million were frozen, or they weren't canceled, and so they were paused, or whatever you want to call it, to the state of Minnesota. And in that letter, it said all grants and funding. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion has been for farmers, for the department, for all of our agencies. You think the USDA, but it's not just the Department of Agriculture that gets USDA funds. It's Children and Family Services, it's DNR, it's Bowser, it's the Board of Animal Health. And so we've been working with our congressional delegation to identify, what that means, what's impacted. Is that everything? Is that, because that's, about 10% of our budget or a little bit more is federal funds. And over the weekend, we worked on that. I messaged, the USDA with no response, which is frustrating. But today, actually late last night, we started to see some cancellation, or not cancellation, letters pausing dollars going out to first to the University of Minnesota, to our poultry testing lab in Wilmer. And that's concerning because we're in the middle of avian influenza right now. Farmers are testing. We're testing today. So who picks up that cost if we're not being reimbursed? We may have a positive farm today. That farm is going to need to be depopulated. Who's going to pay for that farm? And so as that has continued into today, we have gotten more notifications, as the Board of Animal Health and the Department of Agriculture, of more programs being paused, and more funding in doubt. And so we've always had to, prove, and justify our grants and pieces like that, and we're willing to do that and everything, but it's a lot of uncertainty. So I call on the Secretary to clarify which programs, provide us a list, work with us. My 7 years, I've always been a good partner with USDA. USDA has always been a good partner to us. And to put, this kind of uncertainty into our food safety, into our livestock safety, our workers, our people, is concerning. And so.
Just come out of the blue, there hasn't been widespread fraud in these programs that I'm aware of. Any idea why you're being targeted?
Well, and it does say to the ongoing fraud investigations in Minnesota is what the message is that we're getting. But again, and I'll just speak as the Agriculture Commissioner to target our agency. I'm proud of the record we have. We don't have issues, that I have seen, that we audit everything. In fact, we had a USDA audit on a program last week, and that they, gave us a great audit on, and gave us more money, and now that program is in question this week. And so to me, it's lumping everything in together is concerning. And, I'm going to continue to work with our congressional delegation, with our partners and everybody else to try to get some answers. But, it would be helpful to have some clarification.
And just final follow-up to you, and to be clear, this doesn't just impact farmers, it impacts families that rely on food assistance and SNAP benefits, those types of things. I mean, are these things all in jeopardy?
Yeah, and I think, Tom, and that's what we're trying to get an answer. I was like, what is, included in all this? Because and I think we're getting conflicting messages from the USDA that, we're going through some of our congressional delegation. They're saying, oh, it doesn't do that, it does do this. But, the emails that we're getting, the communications we're getting, at least in our department, and to others, whether it's the University or Board of Animal Health, also, says, no, these programs are paused. So when you're trying to put a budget together and you're trying to spend money, we're making decisions right now. How do we pay for that? How do we help that farmer who may have avian influenza today? How are we going to pay for that? And so we'll see, but we'll keep working on it.
At least one more for John, but before you go, one more for you, somewhat related. Obviously, the stated reason for the immigration crackdown is also fraud, and I'm wondering if you can speak to what you're hearing from farmers and the food processing industry in Minnesota about workers, about how are people showing up, are there fears about not having enough people to checks and things like that, to depopulate farms, that sort of thing. Like, what are you hearing?
Yeah, Tori, it's a huge concern right now. And when I talk to farmers, they may have one employee, they may have many employees. Whether you're a processor that is, and let's face it, a lot of our processing relies on immigrant labor and has for many years. And those folks, whether they're here on a visa or they're citizens, and they'll say, oh, we're not going into the plants or anything. But, I talked to, a farmer yesterday, and his employees stopped at the gas station, to get gas, and we're lucky to get out of there just as ICE was pulling in. But that concern that they had, that they can't even send their employees, don't feel comfortable going into town. We've heard that ICE is parked outside of farms, and, just that presence of being there, is concerning. And so we have farmers calling us, asking what are our rights? We have our businesses calling, say, what are our rights when ICE shows up at our door? And so that's what we'll continue to refer them, whether it's to the Attorney General or to other folks that can help them with that. But there is concern out there. And one more thing I'd say on that is that I hear, farmers are, they don't want to talk, they'll tell me, but they're concerned about retaliation. They're concerned about their payments being withheld. But they do care about this, but there's also that part too. So I hope that calmer heads prevail, and we can move forward with this, because it's a deeply concerning time.
Any of our folks have to go, it's 2 o'clock, so we're leaving this going for questions, but if anybody has to run.
Within the last 24 hours, the President put out a social media saying he will be stopping all federal payments to cities that have sanctuary cities, so-called sanctuary cities. Any reaction to that scope that might have? Do you have any details on what that might look like? Any info at all?
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna Mingy, State Budget Director with Minnesota Management and Budget. We're certainly tracking the communication coming from President Trump over social media about his intention to withhold federal funds from sanctuary cities and states containing sanctuary cities. It is a very, very premature, and we have not received official communication. But I would just say, one of every $3 that the state of Minnesota spends is a federal dollar. Federal funds are incredibly important to the services that we deliver to people. I mean, you heard a lot today about Medicaid and the importance of of federal dollars to support healthcare and long-term care services for folks. It's also important in our education system. Things like special education has significant federal funding. School meals programs rely significantly on federal funding. We talked briefly about nutrition programs, things like SNAP. It's vital for state public health activities. Housing, transportation, like the importance of federal funds can't be understated into the work that we're doing here in Minnesota and for Minnesotans. And so to the, every dollar of federal funds that we lose represents a loss of services to Minnesotans, whether that's because the state needs to fill in the gap and cut somewhere else to do so, or because it's a funding source that we just no longer have. And that's the sort of the decision tree that we'll have to work through, although I anticipate that this is something we hope will stop before it gets started.
The sort of date that you gave was February 1st. Is there an avenue, is there a pathway you're aware of for them to cut all federal payments to the state by that date in 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks away here?
I'm not sure what pathway they would do that. It would certainly be unprecedented. The closest thing we saw would be what happened last January with the funding freeze, which was stopped really quickly.
Anna, do we have a number for how much actually has been frozen yet, or is it all in limbo at this point? All a little bit of confused. What's actually happening?
As you know, there are a lot of moving pieces right now. Some big things we're tracking, obviously the Medicaid number that we are working on. As the number there is very much in flux about what are they withholding, for how long, when does it start, when does it end. So that's we have more information than we did a couple weeks ago, but also a lot of open questions there. We have the programs, that ACF programs of childcare, TANF, social services, block grants. Those things were sort of put under additional review, but then that is now under sort of a judicial pause. Then very much in real time today, we are learning more about the USDA freeze. So, and then there's it's all before. And so those are sort of some of the big things we are tracking, sort of as known or at least in flight right now, but the things coming on, or that might come by February 1st, we haven't received anything to my knowledge on that. One thing you may recall that the MMB website, we have the federal funds implementation team. We try to publish as much, as comprehensive as possible, the tracker of funding disruptions. We are working on updating that, just understanding that there's always a little bit of a lag, but that's a place where I'd encourage you to look as we sort of continue to move forward.
Can you speak at all to Minnesota being a donor state, and that the governor has said before that the feds have been essentially stealing our money? We're giving and we're getting
I can't speak to the specifics, but certainly Minnesota pays more in federal taxes than we receive in sort of federal payments.
I have a question for John. John called from yesterday, actually. Sorry for this. The Zoom was not working. So, the state has obviously also caused, caused the review, delay temporarily some of the funding. I think you said yesterday that after 2 weeks, that funding was going out the door after the Optum review, most of it. But I'm wondering if you know at this time what percentage or how many of the claims reviewed by Optum had further red flags, had issues, would cause further, longer, problematic, what percentage from that audit? What was the results of it essentially?
Sure. So this is going to be a technical answer, but I'm going to do my best. So essentially, we had the first 2-week cycle of billing, subject to the new enhanced prepayment review process. And of the findings from that audit, very few claims, literally a dozen or 20 claims, were rejected as a result of analysis done. So Optum flagged claims, And then our staff went through, our policy and program staff went through and reviewed those claims, depending on their expertise in the service line, and determined whether or not there was an enduring concern with the claim. And very few were ultimately rejected after that review. I should note, we're starting with a smaller number of analyses that Optum is running to get the process started. So there will be more analyses run against the claims as the weeks go by, or the different cycles of billing go by here. So there will likely be more claims flagged because of the additional tests or analyses applied to them. So I don't want to, set, false expectations that we're only going to have, 20 claims flagged each time. We will likely have more, given the more tests that will apply to the claims as we go forward. This was just kind of a beta run here to get going and to start the process. And claims submitted and that were approved and not denied up to December 23rd in that first warrant cycle, the first claim cycle here, that 2-week cycle, that was subject to the prepayment review process. Those were released for payment yesterday.
And for those people that got the approval in the first round of spot checks, essentially, their payments will now continue uninterrupted.
So, yes. So if they have unflagged claims, if there aren't concerns with the claims and they're eventually within the 2-week period approved, there will be a biweekly payment cycle now going forward. We just had a 2-week pause to initiate the process, both to start, there has to be some time for Optum to review the claims, and then also some time for our staff to review after we receive the claims analysis results, and also to do some systems upgrades to align with the new prepayment review process.
When will DHS pay the claims that were issued between the 23rd and the 25th? There's a delay. So when are those going to be paid out, and how many claims were issued in that period?
In 2 weeks on the 27th is when the next payment will go out. So we're back on a biweekly cadence here with payments going out. And we don't yet have analysis in terms of, if you're asking what's the number of claims that were flagged for further analysis. I don't believe we have those data yet.
Sorry, one more question too about the federal funding timing. What is the typical cadence of that? Like, is it usually just whenever the provider, the claim gets approved, it comes, or do they give it to the state in bulk every 2 weeks, every quarter, every month?
So usually we would submit what we call a claim or a draw, and basically try to get a draw in federal matching funds from the federal Medicaid program, CMS, every 2 weeks. That's the general rhythm, though it can vary across states. So it can be dependent on how the state likes to draw its funds down.
And that's why the timing, how long this might last through the feds, when it's resolved, has such a big impact on the total list.
That's right.
All right, checking. They said folks can stick around a little bit. I think maybe your time comes a little bit longer, but I'm going to pull our folks just so it's not a slow trickle. Sorry, you're not.
No worries.
Did Dr. Oz and Secretary O'Neill give you any indication, were they here just for the meeting? Did they say they were here for other reasons? I don't think they put out any releases about public events that they're doing while they're in Minnesota.
I don't know. So I know that they were here to meet with us. I'm not sure of other events they have on their schedule.
I'm sorry if you said this, but just to be clear, they did not give you a timeline as to when you'll know about your appeal, or they'll that appeal will be pending and they won't, hold those funds yet. They haven't given you a hard and fast day of we're turning off the tap on Y day.
No, we don't know yet.
Okay, I have one more for Anna. Okay.
And then this will be the last question, I think, for John.
Okay. Could the state tap the rainy day fund to backfill some of these services and payments if needed? And remind me if the governor could do that, or if you need the legislature to do that February 13th or something, whatever.
So we have we have about $3.4 billion in the general fund budget reserve. The budget reserve statute is really clear that the reserve is to be used for unexpected downturns in the economy and for unanticipated reductions in general fund receipts. Note, federal dollars are not general fund receipts. So if it would take an act of the legislature in order to tap into the budget reserve.
Okay,